There are monsters in history, and then there are men who became legends because of their monstrosity. Vlad III of Wallachia, Vlad Dracula, Vlad the Impaler, a name that still crawls across the skin centuries later. We know him through distorted folklore, through Gothic fiction, through the sanitized lens of heroic resistance against the Ottoman Empire. But beneath the myth, there is blood. Beneath the legend, there are bodies. And among those bodies, forgotten in the archives of brutality, are the women. The concubines, the wives, the daughters, the peasants, the noblewomen, women whose suffering was so extreme, so deliberate, so methodical, that even the chronicles of his own time struggled to contain it. This is Grimoryx, where we don't romanticize the darkness, we confront it. Wallachia, 15th century. A fractured principality caught between two empires, crushed between the Christian West and the expanding Ottoman East. A land soaked in political betrayal, dynastic violence, and endless war. Into this blood-soaked crucible, a boy was born in 1431. Vlad. Son of Vlad Dracula, member of the Order of the Dragon, a chivalric order dedicated to defending Christendom. Dracula, meaning dragon or devil, his son would inherit both meanings. Young Vlad's childhood was not one of safety or innocence. At 11 years old, he and his younger brother Radu were given as hostages to the Ottoman Sultan Murad II, a political bargaining chip to ensure their father's loyalty. Imagine that. A child torn from his homeland, held captive in a foreign empire, surrounded by a culture his people considered the enemy. The Ottoman court was sophisticated, yes, but it was also merciless. Vlad witnessed executions. He learned cruelty as curriculum. He absorbed the architecture of fear. And something inside him crystallized, but the Ottomans didn't just teach him violence. They taught him something far more insidious: control, psychological warfare, the deliberate use of terror as statecraft, and they introduced him to the practice of impalement. A method of execution so horrifying, so drawn out, so publicly degrading, is that it became his signature. When Vlad finally returned to Wallachia in 1448, he was no longer a boy. He was a weapon, sharpened by captivity, forged in resentment. And he carried with him a blueprint for power that would paint the landscape with suffering. His first reign lasted only 2 months. He was overthrown, exiled, forced to watch as rivals claimed his throne. But Vlad was patient. He studied. He planned. He cultivated alliances. And in 1456 he returned. And this time he did not intend to be removed. His second reign began with a massacre. The boyars, the noble families who had betrayed his father and brother, who had destabilized Wallachia for their own gain. Vlad invited them to a feast. Easter Sunday, a day of resurrection, how darkly poetic. They came dressed in their finest. They ate, they drank, they celebrated, and then Vlad's guards surrounded them. The older nobles were impaled immediately, their bodies raised on stakes outside the palace walls. The younger ones, the healthy ones, they were forced to march miles and miles to the ruins of Poenari Castle in the mountains. There they were made to rebuild it. Stone by stone, men and women alike, barefoot, starving, dying in the construction of Vlad's fortress. Their fine clothes rotted off their bodies. This was how Vlad announced himself, not with diplomacy, with corpses. But let's be clear about something. The horror Vlad inflicted was not equally distributed. It never is. War, terror, authoritarian violence. These things always find their sharpest edges against the vulnerable, against the powerless, against women, and Vlad's reign was no exception. In fact, the chronicles, the Saxon accounts, the Slavic manuscripts, the Ottoman records, they all whisper the same thing. Vlad's cruelty toward women was not incidental. It was deliberate, strategic, sexualized, a tool of domination that went beyond the battlefield. Consider the account from the German pamphlets, those early printed horror stories distributed across Europe in the late 15th century. Sensationalized, yes, but rooted in witness testimony from merchants and refugees who fled Wallachia. One story describes a feast. Vlad, seated at a table surrounded by impaled corpses, the stakes arranged in concentric circles like a garden of the damned. He invited a group of noblewomen to dine with him. Imagine the scene: the smell of decay, the flies, the groaning of the dying. The women were forced to eat, to pretend normalcy, while bodies rotted in their peripheral vision. One woman, braver or more foolish than the rest, covered her nose. Vlad noticed. He asked her why. She said the stench was unbearable. His response: he had her impaled, but not quickly, not mercifully. He ordered the stake inserted higher, so she would die slower, so she would suffer longer, a punishment for the audacity of discomfort. Then there is the story of the foreign merchant's wife, a woman whose husband had come to Wallachia for trade. She was beautiful, according to the accounts. Vlad invited her to court. She came, assuming hospitality. Instead, Vlad interrogated her about her clothing. He told her that her shirt was too short, that it violated decency. She protested. It was the custom of her land, she said. Vlad did not care. He had her husband brought in. He asked him if his wife had woven the shirt herself. The man, terrified, said yes. Vlad nodded and then ordered her hands cut off. The reason, he declared, was that she had failed in her womanly duty. She had made a shirt that displeased him. Her severed hands were displayed publicly, a message to other women: your work, your appearance, your existence, all subject to his judgment, all punishable by mutilation. But the cruelty didn't stop at individual acts of violence. Vlad weaponized sexual morality as a tool of social control. He enacted brutal laws targeting women accused of adultery, of premarital sex, of sexual autonomy. Women suspected of infidelity were subjected to public torture. Their breasts were cut off, their genitals mutilated, their bodies impaled and displayed in marketplaces as warnings. Some were skinned alive, their flesh peeled back while still conscious. These were not rare occurrences, they were policy. State-sponsored sexual violence designed to enforce obedience, to terrorize communities, to remind women that their bodies were not their own. And then, there were the mass killings. In 1459 and 1460, Vlad conducted a series of purges targeting the poor, the sick, the disabled, and the so-called morally undesirable. He invited beggars, vagrants, and the ill to a great hall under the pretense of charity. A feast, he promised, food and shelter. Hundreds came, men, women, children. They ate, they drank, they believed, perhaps for the first time in years, that someone cared, and then Vlad's soldiers locked the doors and set the hall on fire. Everyone inside burned alive. The screams, the chronicles say, could be heard across the valley, among the dead. Countless women, widows, prostitutes, the elderly, the forgotten. Vlad's justification: he was cleansing the land, purging weakness, creating order, but what he was really doing was erasing those he deemed without value. Ottoman sources add another layer to the horror. When Sultan Mehmed II, the conqueror of Constantinople, marched into Wallachia in 1462 to depose Vlad, his army encountered something that stopped them cold. A forest, but not of trees, of stakes. 20,000 impaled corpses arranged for miles along the approach to Targovist. Men, women, children. Ottoman prisoners, Wallachian traitors, anyone Vlad considered an enemy. The bodies were in various stages of decay, some still twitching. The Sultan, a man who had seen battlefields across empires, was reportedly so disturbed that he withdrew, but within that forest of death. The Ottoman chroniclers noted something specific: a disproportionate number of women, not soldiers, not combatants, civilians, and many of them, showed signs of sexual violence before death. Torn clothing, positioned in degrading ways. Vlad didn't just kill, he humiliated, he desecrated. He turned death itself into a theater of domination. Why? What drives a man to such extremes? Some historians argue trauma, the hostage years, the betrayals, the constant existential threat of Wallachia's position. Others point to pragmatism, terror as deterrence, impalement as psychological warfare, but these explanations feel Insufficient because what Vlad did to women wasn't about strategy. It was about power in its most primal, most toxic form, the need to dominate, to possess, to punish any deviation from his absolute control. Women in Vlad's world were not people, they were objects, symbols. Territory to be conquered, controlled, discarded, and here's the truly disturbing part. Vlad is remembered as a hero. In Romania, he is celebrated, statues erected, folklore romanticized. He defended Wallachia against the Ottomans, they say. He was ruthless, yes, but necessary, a protector, a patriot, this narrative. It erases the screams, it sanitizes the stakes. It forgets the women who burned, who bled, who died in agony for the crime of existing in his kingdom. History loves a strong man, a warrior prince, a symbol of resistance. But strength built on the broken bodies of the powerless. That's not heroism, that's monstrosity with a crown. Vlad's final years were almost anticlimactic. In 1462, after the Ottoman invasion, he fled to Hungary. He was imprisoned by King Matthias Corvinus, likely due to political maneuvering and forged letters. He spent over a decade in captivity. When he was finally released, he reclaimed the throne briefly in 1476, only to be killed in battle within months. His head was reportedly severed and sent to the Sultan as proof of his death. A brutal end, but nothing compared to what he inflicted. And yet his legend grew, the stories spread, the pamphlets circulated. And centuries later, an Irish author named Bram Stoker would borrow his name, his reputation, his aura of dread, and create a vampire, Dracula, the undead nobleman who drinks blood and preys on the innocent. Fiction, of course, but rooted in something real, because Vlad was a predator. Just not a supernatural one, he was a human monster, and somehow, that's worse. So what do we take from this? What is the lesson in excavating these horrors? It's not about shock value. It's not about demonizing an entire culture or era. It's about refusing to let history erase the victims. It's about recognizing that the narratives we inherit are often written by the victors, the powerful, the men, and in those narratives, women disappear. Their suffering becomes footnote, their names lost, their pain repurposed as myth. But they were real, they lived, they suffered, they died, and they deserve to be remembered. Vlad the Impaler was not a hero, he was not a necessary evil. He was a tyrant who wielded violence with precision and cruelty with purpose. And the women who suffered under his reign. They were not collateral damage, they were targets, deliberately chosen, systematically brutalized, erased by history's preference for glorifying power over mourning its casualties. The shadow of Vlad Dracula is long. It stretches across centuries, across borders, across the boundary between history and horror fiction. But if we look closely, if we step into that shadow and let our eyes adjust, we see them, the women, the forgotten, the silenced, standing in the darkness waiting for someone to finally speak their names. This is Grimoryx, where the past never truly dies and some truths, no matter how dark, refuse to stay buried.